What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to a GTD episode. My name is Cameron Selby, and we are going to be breaking down the Week 12 NFL DraftKings main slate. This is a first look, and normally I record these back-to-back with the showdown slate and this, so typically this is early in the week before practice time. I have to do this on Friday morning due to time constraints, so we do have a little bit more information, and so we don't have to play as many if-then statements as we needed to before, because most of the news that has already come out or we're looking for is pretty much already known. Pretty much all the news that we were looking for is already known. So it's not like we're going to have to guess and check on a lot of things. Now, obviously, there's always things that could pop up late on Friday afternoon for practice. That's usually the big day. I'm recording the morning of Fridays. So that's before all these final practices, which are the big ones to know and tell. But either way, we appreciate. Either way, we appreciate interacting with you guys so far. It's been a hell of a season. It's been a lot of fun. Showdown was a little rough for me just because of the fact that I didn't expect Houston to just dominate Buffalo like they did. Josh followed up his arguable best overall game of the season with his possibly worst game of the season. And I know Houston's defense is top notch, but I did not expect that. I don't think a lot of people did. And I think the number one money spot barely even hit 100 points. So it was a weird game, weird slate, but kudos to the Houston Texans really turning around. I thought they would, but yeah, in a big way, Battle Reds, all that good stuff. Either way, we're going to be getting into this main slate. Also, we got Thanksgiving next week to look forward to because it's a really, really fun three-gamer. And instead of doing a showdown and then a main, it's going to be a Thanksgiving special where we'll kind of do a vague breakdown of the three-game. We'll give a little quick look into all of the showdowns because I want to play everything I can. 3 of the 4 highest totals on the entire week is going to be on that Thursday slate. So it's a lot of fun. A lot of points should be scored, and I'm really looking forward to it. But we can't get ahead of ourselves. We got to make money on this slate first. So I'd say let's get right into it. So kicking it off, let's talk about some of the highest totals like we always do. The number one total is a very interesting, polarizing game, and it is the New England Patriots going against the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll get into why that's so important in a little bit. Next up, you got the Giants and the Lions. Lions probably pulling the heavy weight of that total at 50. Next up, you got the Colts and the Chiefs, which the Chiefs, after dropping another divisional game, they're almost in must-win territory coming against the Colts team, who is one of the highest scoring offenses in football and coming off a bye. So it's a massive, massive important game, and they need to bring their A game. So I expect points in that one. Then, as always, it's an entertaining Philly and Dallas showdown where Philly, yeah, they're 8-2. It doesn't feel like they're playing great. It feels very similar to 2023 when they're started out 10-0, but something just didn't feel right, and then the wheels fell off. Well, Philly's just offense, back-to-back games, scoring less than 17 points, and it just doesn't feel good at all what they're doing. Dallas, meanwhile, coming to their bye, emotional win. They're at home, and I wouldn't be surprised if they came into that game because Dak plays NFC East opponents at home pretty well. And then next up, you got a similar total at 47.5, Jacksonville and Arizona. Jacoby Brissett setting completion records and is just going to continue to light it up. And then bringing up the rear, it is a big drop-off after that, but a 44 total is going to be the Jets and the Ravens, which, again, that is a very one-sided because that is the highest spread on the entire slate. Baltimore favored by 13.5, and it's a 44-point total. So make with that what you will. Let's jump right into the quarterbacks, though. Up top, Drake May. I know people thought Drake May would have a breakout year. I don't think anybody expected that he would be the number one priced quarterback on a slate that included Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott. He's the top of the crop. Obviously, it's a great matchup. It's a great total, highest on the slate, and it's really exciting. But the problem is it's always frustrating and tough to stack. Cincinnati's defense is very gettable in all ways, shapes, and form, and we have been targeting them all year in that regard. But once again, it's tough to see who you're going to stack with. At least Stephon Diggs is kind of coming into his own and coming off a 100-yard game on the Thursday slate last week, whereas Booty was out. You had Matt Collins kind of stringing together a couple of pretty strong performances. TreVeyon Henderson, 5 touchdowns, 2 games. But Stevenson could very well be back. So, I mean, this offense will score points. It's just how do they do it? I feel like a lot of people will play Drake May, but it's going to be a mix and match approach of how you go about it. You don't have to do doubles with him based on the way he plays and spreads things out. But he's definitely one that you should heavily consider it, especially if you play a ton of lines. Going down, like I said, Patrick Mahomes coming off a really back-to-back strange performances, getting outplayed against Josh Allen and then by Bo Nix last week was very, very interesting. 1 touchdown, last 2 games, 2 picks. Has not played well, and he needs a statement bounce back game. Going against the Colts, coming off a bye. Also, remember they added Sauce Gardner at the trade deadline, so this is his first game in the States because the last time they did play, it was overseas. And I mean, he needs to get it going. So I think this is a prime, locked in Patrick Mahomes kind of spot. Whether that leads to being the millionaire maker quarterback, that remains to be seen. Obviously, outside of Rashee Rice, it's pretty easy to stack or double stack Patrick Mahomes. Xavier Worthy has had a stretch of rough games. Last week, Mahomes missed him on like a 65-plus yarder for a touchdown. And outside of that, since Rashee Rice has been back, he has been demoted to like a 2A more so than just like, hey, a 1-2 punch like what Dallas is showing with Pickens and CD right now, which I was wrong in that regard. I thought they would both get theirs, but it hasn't really come into fruition, at least in recent weeks. Lamar Jackson, he still doesn't feel right. He did have a 4-touchdown return in his game against Miami. He had to be involved on all 4 touchdowns, but it doesn't feel like he's the threat on his legs as much. He hasn't scored a rushing touchdown all the way since week 1, which is incredible to think about. He's not completed more than 20 passes in any of the games since week 3. It's basically, can he be involved in all 3+ touchdowns is how I really think you'll be getting there with the Jets. Again, the Jets are going to be a very gettable defense, but at the same time, it's really hard to convince yourself, let's do some Lamar stacks and stuff like that. So it is a reasonable price if you want to go that route. He might be the lowest owned of the high-end quarterbacks, just because it's so easy. It's so much, you feel so much better about stacking all these other guys. But yeah, tough to really build around this week. I don't really think I'm going to be approaching my lines with Baltimore builds. Have Baltimore pieces, sure, but I don't know about going to Lamar doubles or even single stacks. I don't even think you need to get there because I don't know if he possesses the 30-point upside that we could possibly see from these other guys. Jalen Hurts, on paper, great matchup. Back-to-back, again, rough performances. He had 1 rushing touchdown, but under 15 points each of the last 2 games. It really looked like right before the bye he was starting to figure it out, and the offense was starting to hum a little bit. Dropping 28 against Minnesota, dropping 38 in a get their lick back game against the Giants. But after that, coming out of the bye, scoring 16, scoring 10, in wins. Kudos to you for doing that. But I know people might look at Jalen Hurts, 32nd ranking matchup, that might elevate him a little bit. Obviously, he had his way for the most part with Dallas the last time they played, all the way in the season opener. But at the same time, 2 rushing touchdowns. He didn't get there with any passing touchdowns. And on top of that, they didn't really need to push anything because they didn't have the ball for it. Was a weird opener. Regardless, something just doesn't feel right. And also, Dallas's defense is starting to get a little healthy. Had a really good performance on Monday Night Football against the Las Vegas Raiders. And I'm not saying that Dallas can hold them under 20 once again, but I think it is on the board of just Philly struggling offensively. Dallas upsets them, which is not how I would have felt last week going into this game, but just consecutive bad weeks from Philly. Dallas, emotional, big win, like I mentioned earlier. And I just feel like this is a spot where Philly could struggle by being the chalky team. It is all reasonably priced for that team, but I just don't feel like they have the 30-point scoring upside this week. And if that's the case, it's going to be tough to get to Philly. I understand if you wanted to go that route. The matchup looks great on paper, but everybody's starting to get healthier. Quentin Williams was a massive impact in his first game as a Cowboy. And on top of that, like I said, the corners and DBs are getting healthy, which they've been decimated throughout the entire season. So, this can be a back and forth game. I just don't know if I can convince myself to get behind Philly builds like I thought I would 1 week prior. I'll go to the other side of that game real quick. But Dak Prescott, first game out of a bye after a couple of rough games. right before. 4 touchdowns, was flawless. There was nothing bad you could say. He did lose a fumble, but at the same time, he still got there in a big way against the Las Vegas Raiders. And it was the George Pickens show. It wasn't even CD that had to be the big game getter. And on top of that, almost had 5 touchdowns, but CD dropped one. It was a little misplaced ball at the very end. Nitpicking doesn't matter. It's only either way. Fantastic game. He's been lights out for the majority of the season. $6,400, pretty reasonable price, and it's not the best matchup. Philly's defense has not been the reason that they've been struggling of late, or at least feel like something's off. So this could be a 20-17 kind of back and forth game, not necessarily a shootout like people might have expected. It is there, but now that George Pickens has gone off, CeeDee Lamb is CeeDee Lamb. When you're stacking Dak, you got to play. Usually you feel comfortable doing it with CeeDee, but doing it with George Pickens, it all of a sudden feels like you're like the Rams and you're paying $15,000 for 2 receivers, and all of a sudden you have no more money left. So if you want to go that route, sure. I don't know if it's necessary. Joe Burrow, the big talking point. He was full return to practice on Wednesday, which is a massive sign. And then Thursday, once again, full participant. So it's not even maintenance or just a big ramp up. And they're going to wait until the Thursday game next week because they are the Thursday night game against the Ravens. But no, they're 3-7 now, and they're almost approaching must-win territory. So he is going to make it a run. And New England previously has been starting to struggle against the pass game, at least. They have a really bad sample size of playing good passing teams. But the ones that they have, at least Emeka Buka went for over 100 and a touchdown. Drake London looked like prime Julio Jones, scoring multiple touchdowns and was in the Millionaire Maker. But outside of that, you're playing New Orleans, Tennessee, Cleveland, and the Jets, who are 4 of the bottom 6 passing offenses in football right now. So you get a lot of breaks there. But the ones that have at least been adequate or above average, they've been gotten against. And so now, if Joe Burrow's back, I'm not saying Joe Burrow is going to be the core of this play or slate. But with Jamar Chase suspended because he's spitting on Jalen Ramsey, T. Higgins all of a sudden becomes very, very interesting and maybe a core play of this slate because he is definitely in play of going for 100 plus, getting 12 targets, a touchdown, maybe even 2. And all these cheaper guys that if you play Joe Burrow, you're going to double stack him because he's not a rushing upside quarterback. Then the Yoshi Vosses of the world and the Noah Fant and all these guys become much more interesting. Even Chase Brown, who's really started to ramp it up, even though they are really good against running backs. So it is the highest total on the slate, and I wouldn't be shocked if Cincinnati looked really, really interesting from a value perspective. I know T. Higgins' price elevated just because they knew Jamar was likely going to get suspended, but I don't think that the others of the Bengals offense have elevated enough to where these doubles can't be viable in any way, shape, or form. Daniel Jones popped up on the injury report due to a calf injury. So this is the true one that we need to monitor. Obviously don't have that information, and it was kind of out of nowhere. So if it's the case of being injured, that really opens up some weird stuff for the Indianapolis Colts. And I don't even know top of my head, I don't think that Anthony Richardson has been elevated from his orbital fracture. He went to IR. That was a weird thing. I guess one of the bands popped into his eye and broke his orbital bone. And he's been on IR since. So if Daniel Jones doesn't play, whether it's Riley Leonard or Brett Rippon, both of them minimum price guys, but that makes it very interesting. And that changes the slate essentially if it is not Daniel Jones in the fold, because you got another minimum price quarterback slate. Going down, there's some pretty solid options in the 5K range. I mean, don't want to skip over Jared Goff. Once again, an awesome matchup, and it just comes down to when they're scoring points. Is he going to be involved with 300 yards and 3 touchdowns like we thought 2 weeks ago? Or is it just going to be like Tampa where they score 3 touchdowns, he's only involved on 1, doesn't get there because he's 12 points when he was that exact same price point? So a little bit of it's a guess and check, but they're not good against the pass game, and they're gettable to where Detroit's receivers can really have a big day. Jameson Williams is really kind of starting to elevate his game more consistently lately. On top of that, Sam Laporta is now on IR, which we didn't see on the last main slate that they were on. And then also Amon-Ra St. Brown's Amon-Ra St. Brown. So definitely very interesting way to go about things if you wanted to go the Detroit side. Jordan Love, 5,800. I think that's tied for a season low in price. Yeah, it is. And all these guys are cheap receivers. It's going against Minnesota. They're coming off a frustrating loss to where they were coming off of back-to-back frustrating losses, turned it around a little bit against the Giants, but it felt like it was they struggled. Jameis Winston had a chance to tie it up and maybe even steal it this past week. But either way, 5 of the last 6 games under 18 fantasy points. He doesn't really provide a ton with his legs, so I don't really expect to have a ton of interest in him, but he's reasonably priced. Caleb Williams, this is going to be one of his last great matchups of the year because he's going to start coming into a tough stretch. On top of that, Chicago is usually the first place that weather starts to get rough when we get into late November, early December games. Coming off a dud against Minnesota, wasn't involved in any touchdowns. His price dropped $200, but Pittsburgh's passing defense has been pretty bad for the most part this year. So $5,700, weather permitting, which I don't see any weather things that are really sticking out thus far. I think he's very cheap and reasonable. And we'll just have to see with the snap shares and we'll just have to see with this offense how we'd want to go about stacking, because there are pieces to go. And I think because of the inconsistencies of every single person involved in that offense, it's pretty reasonable to get behind. So I might get back to some Caleb for possibly the final time on some main slates, depending on what goes about. Jackson Dart, again, high total. They're going to be playing from behind. He basically is a lot to score a rushing touchdown lately. The problem is he's in concussion protocol, and because he's a non-participant on Thursday, that's not a good sign. If that goes back to Jameis Winston, that might be the best thing for stackable options in this offense. Jameis is still 4,600, so he is definitely a value play consideration. This was a cold weather game. This one's going to be in a dome. He doesn't care if he's down 20 or 30. He's just going to rip it. So if he's got the 300-yard upside, I view him similarly to a Jacoby Brissett in terms of fantasy production and productivity. And if he's going to play, $4,600 in a dome against a gettable secondary, I think is a very good way to approach it. And then if Jackson Dart plays, once again, he shouldn't be limited, but please protect yourself because this is the 4th time that you were checked for a concussion. Finally got diagnosed with one. And, I guess John Gruden was right about him needing to protect himself. Going down, if for whatever reason Joe Burrow does not play, Joe Flacco, insert everything I said, it's very reasonable to say that he can really go off. The only thing is without Jamar Chase now, I think that really kind of caps his upside because I don't think he has that 350 or 450 plus yard, 3+ touchdown upside with just T. Higgins. But and on top of that, no rushing upside, but a reasonable price point. His price went up. It's still not enough. Once again, 5 starts, all 5 games, at least 20 fantasy points. They're just letting him go and be like, this, just throw touchdowns to the guy. Yeah, Trey McBride, 85. Yeah, go to him. Jacoby Brissett, his price rose. It's still not enough. He's gone at least 20 fantasy points every single game that he's been a starter, at least 2 touchdowns every single game. I think they're realizing this season's done, and they're just letting it go and throwing it to their best players. So Trey McBride has scored a touchdown every single game with Jacoby Brissett in the fold. Now he's getting back-to-back 100-yard games, and Michael Wilson's now involved, especially with Marvin Harrison continuing to be in out. So $5,300, that is a core piece of playing. If I do say so myself, I'm going to be very interested in getting a lot of him. Yeah, and on top of that, his ownership's still not there. It's a great matchup. They're at home. I just can't get enough of Arizona. I'm going to continue going that route until I'm proven wrong. But $5,300, even if he gets 17, like that's perfectly fine. And he's got stackable options. I know Trey McBride is 68 now, which that's tough to get behind. But if he's scoring a touchdown, he's got 100-yard bonus upside. He's basically a wide receiver 1 at a tight end slot. And if he's the only guy on this slate that is like that, because Brock Bowers, obviously a great spot. Or obviously Brock Bowers has that similar upside, but it is going against the Cleveland Browns, which is a much tougher defense to go against. On top of that, Geno has not been playing well. But then outside of that, it's him, Travis Kelce. He's kind of in a league of his own right now, and even though he's by far the highest owned tight end, he by far has the highest leverage score of any tight end going into the week. Going down, kind of similar cheap quarterbacks that you can make a case for. All going to be low owned. You can easily get overweight to everybody. Tyler Shuck, the cheapest of the bunch. He finally had a 2-touchdown game this past before the bye. Tyler Shuck finally had a 2-touchdown game right before the bye. 19 fantasy points is a strong score for a $4,400 quarterback. Being at home against Atlanta, Atlanta's falling apart. Now Michael Penix is on IR. Drake London is not going to play, and it just doesn't feel good. New Orleans is actually favored in this game for what it's worth. So him, Kirk Cousins, they're both $4,400. That's the puke game of the week. So if you want to get behind some of those builds, it's a reasonable way to go about it to save some money. But if and when Jackson Dart is not going to play, if and when Aaron Rodgers is not going to play, I think I prefer a Mason Rudolph more. I think I prefer Jameis Winston more than both of them. And it's really easy to get to. Cam Ward is just good luck, man. Now Calvin Ridley's out for the year. I just whatever. And then I did forget Tyrod Taylor taking over as the starter. They announced that Justin Fields was benched on Monday right after this pricing came out, or right before the pricing came out, rather. So he's a guy that's going to at least elevate the pass game more. I don't know if, again, because of all the options in the 4K range, especially with the injuries trending the way they are, I don't think you need to go this route. But it does make you feel better about all these cheap jet receivers that are probably all below 4K because nobody's really standing out or stepping up. And if that's the case, I'm interested in some Jets receivers to open up some value. But we'll just kind of play with that how we may a little bit later on. Going over to the running back position, though, JT's back again. Tough matchup, though. Kansas City pretty strong against running backs, and if Daniel Jones is not in the fold, all of a sudden that just puts even more focus on Jonathan Taylor. And if that's the case, 10K is a very rich price point to spend up on. I think I probably prefer to go down to Bijan at $8,500. He's gotten Bijan having a big breakout game. First one in a while with 2 touchdowns over 100 yards rushing this past week against the Panthers. We were overweight to him, and he did a very great way of returning about this line. And the Saints, first matchup against them this year, if you're going to attack the Saints, is going to be on the ground. Bijan has had a very good track record against these very New Orleans Saints. He had his first breakout game as his rookie year was against the Saints. I remember that with his pass catching multi-touchdown game, 27 fantasy points. Followed that up to end the season with 29 fantasy points against the New Orleans Saints. Then last year in September, it was a weird game. They were playing from behind, and he only had 7 carries. Kind of throw it out the window. With 7 carries, he still somehow got to 11 fantasy points. But then the second matchup against the Saints, 100 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. He also had 3 receptions. So I think for the price point differences, he is by far the best play compared to these two, I would say. I'd say comparing the two, Bijan versus Jonathan Taylor, I don't think there's anything that you could say that Jonathan Taylor is a better play than Bijan so much that you should spend $1,500 more. I don't think that's the way to go about it. And it comes down to Jahmyr Gibbs. Are you going to be involved on a ton of the production that you're going to have against the Giants? Because you very much will. Second worst against running backs, and Jahmyr Gibbs' consecutive games where he's gone over 100 yards. Once was rushing, once was receiving. Bijan, CMC, league of their own in terms of dual threat running backs right now. And $300 is a fine price point. It's fair. And him versus Bijan is going to be the tough decision maker to do it. I think getting very, very different from a tournament perspective because they're both in great spots. If you doubled up on an expensive running back, I don't think a lot of people have been doing that recently. So if you can find a way, there's cheap quarterbacks and cheap stacks. I think that might be a thing I might want to flirt with it a little bit when we do build lines. Josh Jacobs, one that we want to keep an eye on. He's been limited throughout the week. It sounded like he had like a bone bruise, and it was a best case scenario essentially with what people thought the injury might have been. They thought it might have been a PCL sprain and he would miss multiple weeks, but there is an outside chance he does play. If he does not play, it goes all the way down to Emmanuel Wilson, who has already been priced up. So $5,300. It's not like you're saving a ton, and it's not like Emmanuel Wilson is. I don't view this as Jamal Williams replacing Aaron Jones in the starting lineup, where you can lock him in. He's going to get all the volume. Emmanuel Wilson will probably get the majority of it, but I don't know if I'm really interested in going $5,300 for that specific build or place. I don't know if I'm interested in going 5,300 for that uncertainty because we haven't seen him in this role. Moving down, these are some very interesting names. The very next three: Derrick Henry at home against the Jets. He doesn't have any pass catching upside. Can he be involved on touchdowns? Yes, he can be involved on two. Can he get over 100 yards? Yes, but can he put that together? He hasn't had a single game this year where he has put that together with multi-touchdowns plus 100 yards since week one. And since then, last week was his best effort from a fantasy perspective of the year, getting 100 yards and one touchdown to get to 23 fantasy points. 7,600 against the Jets. I can understand getting behind it. He might be the lower owned of the bunch up top. Saquon Barkley, again, on paper, it looks great. But last week, they absolutely shut down the Raiders' run offense. And on top of that, Quentin Williams, like I said, it is a very impactful trade that they did for him. And he instantly stood out as soon as he came in, and they just couldn't let anything go. Saquon Barkley, I think because of that opponent rank, people are going to get to him. I just don't think that the matchup's as great as it appears. And if he's going to be one of the rivaling being the top 5 owned running back, I probably want to be underweight to him. Trayvon Henderson is going to be the most interesting name to me, though, because I have no idea if they're going to let him have his role. We'll go down and we'll filter to bring up Ramondre Stevenson just to get an update on name. Like, he's limited. He was limited on Wednesday and Thursday. Those are usually good signs, like you're turning on the way up to be available. If he does play, can you spend $6,700 for Travion? The thing is, when you score 5 touchdowns in 2 games, there's no way you should go back to just being 25 to 30% of the snaps behind Ramondre Stevenson. There's no way you should. But at the same time, your upside's severely capped because I don't know if he has the multiple breakaway run and a ton of goal line work coming his way, and that's tough to think about, especially considering they're by far the best matchup. So if Ramondre Stevenson does not play, Henderson's a core play. If Stevenson does play, he's going to be a good tournament play. I still think he is in the tournament pool because he'll be less than 10% owned, and you can get overweight to him pretty easily. It's a fantastic matchup. And if you don't like him, Ramondre at 52. That's pretty easy to get behind, and I don't think a lot of people will play either if both do play. I view it as a very similar to a Sonic and Knuckles, to where both of them are in the pool when there's good matchups involved, but rarely anybody does on Main Slate play David Montgomery because of Jahmyr Gibbs as a threat. That's kind of how I view both. Is I think they're both viable if they do both play. Jaylen Warren banged up his knee, and Warren banged up his ankle, and he returned to the game, but he's been limited. And you never know with ankle injuries how bad they swell up or how they respond following a week of getting off the adrenaline and stuff like that. I'm a guy that is unathletic as hell, but I've dealt with multiple ankle injuries, and some have put me out weeks and months because of how tough it has been. But yeah, you just don't know how you're going to respond. If he does not play for whatever reason, remember Kenneth Gainwell, the 1 game sample, 31 fantasy points, nearly got to 100 yards, multiple touchdowns, 6 receptions, all in 1 game in his 1 game sample without Jaylen Warren in the fold. So if Warren doesn't play, Ken Gainwell, very, very core play. If he does play, 66 is kind of pricey, I would say. It is a bummer, though, because he was a very chalky play last week, and Ken Gainwell had multiple touchdowns and 27 fantasy points, and it made me sad because there was a line where me and a friend of the show finished in the top 10 in the Thursday Monday contest, and had all that production gone from Kenneth Gainwell to Jaylen Warren, we might have been in first place. That's how close we were to the top of that contest. Going down, there's not the sexiest matchups. I can't really get behind Ashton Genty. I get Chase Brown might have an elevated pass catching role, but New England's been dominant against running backs this year. Breece Hall, going to be trailing by a lot, 13.5-point dog. Tyrod Taylor, at least for what it's worth, is back, so maybe he has a little bit more pass catching upside. Raiders have been pretty strong against running backs also. I mean, Javonte couldn't really get going, even though the offense was just humming. And so it's fine. I just don't know if I can get behind Quinchon this week. So yeah, the low 6K range for the first time in a little bit is pretty rough. Jones revenge game? Question mark, exclamation point. Back-to-back games, 6 targets. Last week had a season best 22 touches or opportunities. 3 straight games in double digits and $5,700. I know his price has risen gradually, but still I don't think is enough based on where he's trending. So it's not the best matchup, but it's the narrative is there, and $5,700 is pretty good bargain. Alvin Kamara, at least I'm glad I faded him for the most part in best ball this year. He had a season best 14.5 fantasy points last week. So 25 touches right before the bye week. It is a good matchup. Bottom 5 against running backs are the Atlanta Falcons. Him being limited, I just assume that he's fine. I think he's been kind of limited or hampered by the injuries since week 7. So I'm not necessarily concerned about him missing. $5,500 is pretty reasonable. And I don't necessarily know if he's going to be crazy owned. Right now, he's showing as under 10%. So it's worth mentioning. Trey Benson could return from IR this week, allegedly. It would be cool if he did, but at the same time, it's not a great matchup. $5,400, and on top of that, because he was on IR, missed 4 or 5 games or over the past stretch, you don't know how instantly he's going to inherit this role. I think he is a very solid opportunity to be a league winner, a best ball stash and cash kind of play as we go into December. But for the time being, at least this week, I'm going to be, holding my marbles or holding my water to wait and see how it goes about. Kenneth Walker, please just give him the ball. Just give him the ball. Last week, 111 yards and a touchdown. Opportunities, which was the best since week 4 against Arizona. 3rd straight week, he is outsnapped Zach Charbonnet. Zach Charbonnet, outside of poaching goal line touchdowns, has provided nothing to keep this role. Less than 3 yards to carry the majority of the games he plays. Last week, once again, just inefficient. Kenneth Walker, the explosive plays, he got called back on a rushing touchdown, but then got another one later in the game. He was like $5,100. He was $5,100, and I stayed away because of the matchup, and he got there anyway. I just want you to give him the damn ball. This is actually a good matchup. I want to see how his ownership transpires this week, but if he is less than 5% going against the Tennessee Titans as a 10-point favorite, I'm in on it. And similar to what I said, David Montgomery earlier, compared to the New England situation, fantastic matchup at home. Nobody is going to, once again, at home. Rarely people go to David Montgomery on main slates. They just don't. But this is the ideal matchup to do so. They're a 13.5-point favorite, 5,300 at home against the Giants, second worst against running backs. And he's less than 4% owned right now. So I am all about getting overweight to David Montgomery if I can. There's very good value there, I would say. And I think he should project pretty solid. The only thing is, because he's got Jahmyr Gibbs, maybe Jahmyr goes for multiple touchdowns and David doesn't go for any. That's always on the board. But it's also on the board that David Montgomery gets 2 touchdowns and Jahmyr Gibbs gets none. Like, it is very reasonable that he could have a 15-plus point outing and nobody's going to be on him. So I think he's very fine, reasonable value for this slate. Going down, if and when Trey Benson is not ready, Zonovan Knight, limited to an ankle injury. He should play, though, but Amari DiMercado was already ruled out, so now it comes down to it's only Bam Knight and only Michael Carter. So Michael Carter had 3 touches last week. Zonovan Knight had 9 with 4 receptions and targets. So $4,900, even though it's a tough matchup, that's a solid value that you have to at least consider. And then after that, there's not really a whole lot that I'm really looking forward to. I mean, Tony Pollard's at $5,000, but Tajay Spears is starting to really take away a role. since he's been back, he's had at least 3 targets in every game. Last week against a tough matchup against the Texans, didn't really do a ton on the ground, but he's constantly eating into Tony Pollard's work. Tony Pollard has been nothing this year. He's only getting like 13 opportunities a game, and he's not scoring touchdowns. So I can't get it behind him at all in the tough matchup. Big underdog on the road. And like I said, there's nothing really down here that sticks out as of right now, but we can wait and see how things go about the rest of the week if any kind of late shocking injury news pops up. But that's a pretty good way to talk about the running backs. Receiver wise, like I mentioned, Jamar Chase is out. So the big name is $7,100 T. Higgins. That is going to be a core play on this slate. I would say that he's got that 20-point floor. He's going to project really well. I think in a turn, he might be one of the most popular receivers. Yes, he's showing as the most popular receiver on the slate, but he's still showing positive leverage, which is very telling with the price point and how to go about it. But these top guys, JSN, $9,000, can Tennessee keep it competitive enough to where he can pay off that salary? Because $9,000, you would think he's due for a dud, but he just keeps scoring 20 fantasy points. Only one time this year has he been under 20 fantasy points. And there's a game like, for example, Arizona. All of this, except for one catch, was in the first quarter. But they were blowing them out so much that he wasn't really a factor. So honestly, at this point, with $9,000, you need closer to the 30-point ceiling than you do this 20-point. I don't think a 20 to 25-point game is really going to pay off enough compared to these other guys when you can save $1,000 and go Amon-Ra St. Brown, who has a similar floor as long as he's involved on touchdowns, because he also has 10 targets a game in recent weeks, and he's in a good matchup as well. CeeDee Lamb, I can get behind at 79. His price is kind of hovered around that throughout the year. Got back on the board last week with a touchdown, but they rode the hot hand of George Pickens. So $7,900, pretty reasonable price. Rashee Rice, his first game of I guess I would say dud since he's returned. He's been heavily involved, though, at least 9 opportunities in every single game. Last week, just against Denver, could not get going. Mahomes had an off game, $7,700, though. At home, it's a better opportunity, and I would assume Sauce Gardner would be, heavily matched up against him throughout the day. But 77, I can get behind. And obviously, if you're going to play Mahomes, I think you start off by going Rashee Rice and figure out what else you're going to do with that. Going down Justin Jefferson, he just doesn't have the upside anymore. We haven't seen it with JJ McCarthy yet. He hasn't gone over 17 points since. So until and it's sad saying this, but until his price gets sub 7K, it's hard to even consider him. And plus, it's not even the best matchup for what it's worth. Drake London, like I mentioned, likely to miss. If he does miss, that opens up a lot with the Atlanta guys. Plus, it's the 3 o'clock slate, so a Darnell Mooney makes a lot of sense. And Kadero Hodge has gone off before with more opportunity. So we'll have to see what really goes on, because both times where he's gone down with the knee injury, it's been late in games. So we don't see the who immediately inherits all of this work. And I don't believe he didn't miss any time the last time he went down with a knee injury. He just had a couple of duds before he kind of got back healthy and good to go again. So this will be likely his first game he misses. Oh, that is not like his other knee injury that he went down against Tampa Bay. That was late in the game as well. He only missed one game this year, and it was in week 8, but that was the game that they got shellacked against the Dolphins. So it's not like you got a ton of sample, because Darnell Mooney was not necessarily the chalk, but by default inherited the most in terms of opportunity, and he had one catch in that entire game. But if you're talking about elevated snap share, David Sills had 90% of the snaps, 3 targets. He's minimum price. The only game this year that Kadero Hodge has been over 10 snaps was in week 8, where he had 66% of the work. He had 8 targets, which was by far the most of all the receivers on the team. And Kyle Pitts, for what it's worth, had the most with 9 in that game. But again, it was a blowout. Now with your Kirk Cousins in the fold, I don't know if that necessarily complicates things, but teach you their own. George Pickens, honestly, I thought his price would elevate even more, but again, it was a Monday game, so I understand why it didn't. But He's been awesome. 5 straight games, at least 78 receiving yards, and he's been just awesome. He's earned every penny so far. Now Cowboys have to pay it, and now that's going to be the offseason story, and it's going to be annoying to think about. But very strong game, capable of going over 1,000 yards in this game. He's capable of going over 1,000 yards on the season in this game. So it just comes down to me. I think I still start with CD, but if you think it's double stack viable, I guess it's affordable, more affordable at least than I thought it would be. Stephon Diggs, like I mentioned, 3 straight games with the touchdown, then follow that up with a 9 for 105 game this past week. So $6,500, his price is elevated. But the 6K range is kind of weird. I'm not really too interested in a lot of these names outside of George Pickens. Maybe Rome Odunze, because like I said, Pittsburgh's pass defense has been pretty bad. But he's gone back and forth with awesome game, dud, awesome game, dud. So I guess we're on trend of awesome game, if that's how that works. But going down, though, in the 5K range, as a talent, they don't deserve to be here. But A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, they're sub 6K. On paper, it's a good matchup. Devontae Smith has actually had a pretty good track record against the Dallas Cowboys. I remember playing him multiple times where he scored touchdowns and gone over 100 yards and has cashed out in positive ways. Jameson Williams, his price is rising. Still not enough. 3 straight games with at least 16 fantasy points. Has scored 4 of the last 5 games. And now Samuel Laporta being out, that just makes you feel a little bit better about attacking this passing game with him in the fold. And now he's having more consistent play. DK Metcalf, $5,300. He's flirted around all year with that. Outside of catching an 80-yard touchdown against Minnesota, he hasn't done anything to pay off his like late 3rd, early 4th round price tag that he was in redraft and best ball season. But $5,300, sure, I can get behind it, I guess. He always is going to project well. He's always going to pull ownership. He's always going to be positive leverage. But the thing is, he more often than not has not paid off that price tag. And if you're with Mason Rudolph instead of Aaron Rodgers, does that make you feel better about him? I don't necessarily know if it does, but it's on the board at least. Going down, I mean, there's a ton of names you can make a case for. Starting off, though, Michael Wilson. Look at this guy. 18 targets, 15 for 185. And that was a big smash win for including him in a ton of lineups last week. In relief of Marvin Harrison being out, that he by far inherited the most work as a receiver. And I would anticipate that stays the same. He rose $1,000. It's not enough, and I'm excited to play him. He should be one of the highest owned receivers, but I don't think he really is right now. I think he's still outside of the top 5 in terms of ownerships. So I'm locking him in at 48 in a lot of lines, and I'm probably going to be sad, but it is what it is. I'm just going to follow that momentum that Jacoby Brissett's just going to sling it. And then all these guys are wide receiver 2s in situations that you can get behind. DJ Moore, look at that 32. That 32 looks pretty. He's not going to be high owned. Darnell Mooney could inherit the most, but he could be blown out, and you could just punt to a 3K Atlanta receiver instead. Xavier Worthy, I think this could be a get right spot for him because this is a gettable secondary. I would anticipate Rashee Rice taking most of the, I guess, eyes off of him. Like I said, he should be 4 for 85 and a touchdown after last week, but Mahomes missed him on a deep ball. He at least is just kind of worth mentioning because he's limited. He sat out on Wednesday, limited this past week. Sounds like there's no issue of him not playing, but he does need a bounce back get right spot because he's been trending down, and they need to start ramping him up to where he's an actual threat going into the postseason and going into this run where they're just starting to struggle. But he needs to be healthy when they're kind of fighting, trying to put together a string of wins over the next few weeks. Darius Slayton, limited once again due to hammy. Look at all these Q tags. Like, if they play, fine. I guess you can paint a picture. If they don't play, it opens up value lower and lower down. Jaden Reed, I don't think there's anything that's, he still hasn't practiced as of Monday. Window hasn't even been cleared, so I don't anticipate him playing this week or next Thursday against the Detroit Lions. So he's going to stay out and just help others out with their roles. But Golden is also limited still. So is Christian Watson. Everybody's banged up with the Green Bay Packers in their receiving game. Greg Dortch, he had a big elevated role, and I guess triple stack was the call against the guy who set the record for completion percentage. But Greg Dortch, season best, 68% of the snaps, caught all 6 of his targets and a touchdown, 18 fantasy points. His price also rose $1,000, but you can still paint a picture because he is going to have the second, third highest on receiving snaps. Xavier Weaver actually had 74% of the snaps last week, but he had more of a role in terms of pass catching work. So Jerry Jeudy, if Shadur, I did not mention Shadur Sanders is likely going to start, but if Shadur, he is under pressure to Shadur is under pressure to make some noise this week. So you need to do something. And if your wide receiver one is $4,100, that is a very kind of possibly overlooked play in my estimation. I think I might be interested in getting some ownership of him. Andre Yoshivas, I mentioned getting an elevated role if and when Jamar Chase is out. So with him, he's consistently getting 70+% of the snaps. And obviously his targets are down. But when it's Jamar Chase and he's one of the biggest target percentage leaders in the entire sport, $4,100, big value, and I think that's a very reasonable price point to get behind. And then going down, there's a lot of names actually you can kind of get behind. So you got Luther Burden here, who is continuing to get an elevated workload, snap share, whatever you want to call it. Last week and the week before, both 40+% of the snaps. Those are the only 2 games this year he's had that, averaging about 4 opportunities a game, 3 catches in both games. Only has caught 1 touchdown this year, but I think as the season goes on, usually rookies, that's when they kind of start getting their money. He's going to be a low-owned play, $3,600. Cedric Tillman, the same reasons I mentioned to Jerry Jeudy, 3 for 52 this past week against Baltimore. So going against the Raiders, even worse secondary, $3,700 is very easy to get behind. Isaiah Hodgins, 5 for 57 this past week, played a lot of snaps, and he's cheap. He's easy to play, especially if Jameis Winston's going to be the one that is going to be playing. And then all the Jets receivers. I'm just going to filter to the Jets just so you can see all the names. But Tyrod Taylor is the best thing that could happen to any of these guys. But their wide receiver one is $3,300. Their wide receiver one is $3,300. John Mechie last week, 82% snap share. Caught a touchdown, caught all 3 targets, 3 for 45. A.D. Mitchell had the most targets, had 6 of them, only caught 1. A couple of them overthrown, had a couple drops as well. But they, in his first game with the team, had 49% of the snaps. I'd expect that to increase and elevate, and he's going to eventually inherit, at least the second or third most snaps and opportunities throughout the rest of the season, because they're going to figure out, hey, is he a core piece of this offense going forward, or did we just do a flyer and we got to figure it out once again? Isaiah Williams, 74% of the snaps, all of them cheap. If you can nail it, awesome, good for you. That's really the way to go about it. But a lot of names in the 3K range, which we haven't seen in recent weeks. But with that said, let's go ahead and start building some lines. I mean, tight end is pretty self-explanatory. There's value down here. There's awesome options up here. There's not much more to say about it. But we're going to start off with a build that is going to go by the name of Caleb Williams. Like I said, this might be the final time doing double stacks with him because of the matchup and all that stuff, because of the matchups, the weather throughout the rest of the season. So I want to take advantage of it. So if we're going that route, I'm going to probably just start with this, because I know Colson Loveland with Cole Kmet back, he still played 75%. That was the first time, even though Cole Kmet is still playing a ton, Loveland is getting opportunities once again. 5 straight games, at least 4 targets, $3,500. Price hasn't risen enough. So we're just going to start with that and see what we can do. Going down, cheap defense. But who can get a couple sacks? Maybe Tennessee. Last week, 5 fantasy points. We played them a lot. 4 sacks. Got exactly what you needed to. Sure, whatever. Going to running back, though, I think the big strategy this week is going up 1 and then cheap value 1. So I'm going to start off with Bijan. And then we're going to go down to, let's say, Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker. Keep on disappointing me. But it's not based on your play. Next up, we're going to put some value in. And like I said, cheap jet receiver, I think, is a strong way to go about things. I'm going to put John Mechie in, but if you have a certain lean to an AD Mitchell or one of the others, go for it. But they're all, if you can afford him, you can afford everybody else. And look how much salary that opens up, $7,600 per the last two spots in. And if I'm going to do that, that's a lot of things. You can go T. Higgins, and then $8,100 last guy in. That is Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's CeeDee Lamb. I'd probably prefer CeeDee. I think, maybe, allegedly. But if you don't like that, then you can always go there. I always like loading up a little bit more when I can on the 3 o'clock game. So you got some fun options right there, like that. That's a really fun way to go about things. Next up, let's go with the build of the old faithful, Mr. Jacoby Brissett. And it's really easy to know how I'm going to do this. And I don't care if it could be due, because it's an easy way to, you can easily afford it. And it's not that hard. You got a $5,300 quarterback. You got a $4,800 wide receiver one. I'm fine paying up for a $6,800 tight end in this spot. Highest owned, projected by far the best still. Let's say that Dallas continues to make Philly struggle. Last couple weeks, 9 sacks. Last 2 weeks, had a safety. Defensive touchdown against Arizona. Or you had the punt block against Arizona to get you there. But 3 of the last 4 games, at least 9 fantasy points. Philly's offense is struggling. And I expect that this game shouldn't be like a shootout in any way, shape, or form. So I want to do a fun thing to try to afford both expensive running backs. Is that possible? We're going to find out. But if you do that, you got to go down here and get uncomfortable elsewhere. But yeah, you afford other things. For $5,200, you can double punt again if you want to. Go down to Yoshi or even Jerry Judy. $6,300 left, last guy in. That's enough for a Zay Flowers. That's enough for Chase Brown if you can get behind that. Roma Dunze might be my preference of the bunch. Or if you didn't like that, you could try to get up to T. Higgins once again, which he's going to be going in a lot of my lines. Double punting at receiver, pretty scandalous, but I think it could be reasonable to do. Maybe you might have to go a little bit further down on. You might have to go a little bit further down on defense. Maybe go back to Tennessee just to afford the guy that I was thinking about, which is Luther Burden as the last guy in. Or if you wanted to go a different route, maybe you did believe in Isaiah Hodgins, who's projecting pretty solid, 8 fantasy points. That's pretty solid. That's back up to Dallas for this look. Next up, let's go with a Joe Burrow double, because that, I don't know how many people are going to be going that route, but I think it's a fun way to go about it because they are desperate. They are needing to show up and win this game. And if Joe Burrow's back, maybe he's fine enough to sling it. He's not going to be running on that turf toe. I know that. So let's go with that as a double. We're going to bring back with Trayvon Henderson. I'd be a low owned running back if Ramondre Stevenson is not playing. And then value-wise, I think we might have to get some value at running back. So I think Kenneth Walker and David Montgomery both make a lot of sense. Let's do David Montgomery on this one because Detroit is such a high total. I think it's a good idea to get some exposure to that very offense. Trey McBride, I think, is tougher when you go expensive quarterback to get to. So let's try to get a value. Let's say Kyle Pitts. Last time Drake London did not play, had the most targets, 9, caught all 9 of them for 59 yards, 14 fantasy points is certainly going to get the job done as a mid-price tight end. And then $6,700 last 2 in. Surprisingly, you have more money than you would think. But I don't know if how I would rank these preferences, but let's say Rashee Rice is the guy in on this one. And then last guy in, you can go Jameson Williams. You can go the Aaron Jones narrative. Let's say that Jaylen Warren is out and you got Kenny Gainwell. $500, very reasonable price point. Or if you want to correlate a little bit, go Tyler Warren. He's kind of matchup proof as a tight end. Starting to get a little expensive, but I think he might be the lowest owned of the bunch in terms of the big guys, whether that's Travis Kelce coming off a big game, Jake Ferguson keeps catching touchdowns, Brock Bowers, solid opportunity share, and then Trey McBride as obvious play as well. Let's do one more. We'll get out of here. Let's go Patrick Mahomes desperation. Not desperation necessarily, but hey, he needs to show up. So I'm going to start off with that. Everybody would start out like that, but I think most people would gravitate towards Travis Kelce because Xavier Worthy hasn't really been doing well since they've returned. But let's say this is the buy low loan spot and he really goes off. So we're going to go that route. Obviously, we got to throw the cheap defense in. We're going to try to squeeze T. Higgins as well. We're going to have to probably punt at tight end. So if you're talking value at the position, this week the highest value is Noah Fant, Trey McBride, Juwan Johnson, Kyle Pitts are the main names. So let's throw Kyle Pitts back in for some clarity. Didn't mean to pick him on Rob, but we still might. $5,700 the last two spots. Definitely have to punt one running back. Let's go to Ken Walker. And then let's try to get up to a Jahmyr Gibbs this time. And then last guy in, all the way down. There's many options, like I mentioned. That's every Jet receiver once again. With Tyrod Taylor now in the fold, it's Mason Taylor if you preferred him instead of those receivers. Or you can go Isaiah Hodgins once again, like that. There's a lot of flexibility. I think the approach is trying to find the right pieces for them, but also as a different pivot, I also want to get some exposure to Michael Wilson. A lot of it, if I do say so myself. And if I'm going to do that, you can go up to Trayvon Henderson instead. And then that's enough for Mr. Michael Wilson as the last piece. But with that said, guys, that's all I got for you. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Please leave a like. Let us know how you're going to approach this slate. Be on the lookout for next week's Thanksgiving special as we go through all the fun ways to go about attacking that day and hopefully have a profitable, feeling thankful Thanksgiving. We're super thankful. We're super thankful for you guys interacting with us thus far, but we want to keep on increasing that interaction. And so if you have any questions, concerns, comments, doesn't matter. We have all kinds of platforms where you can say your piece. So we love you guys, and we will see you guys on the next one.